Hi, my name's Eric. I'll be reading you selections from Barron's magazine. Issue date is August 3rd of 2026. It's produced by the Audible Local Ledger, a reading service exclusively for people who are blind or print disabled. We start with the column Up and Down Wall Street by Andy Serwer. The headline, Warren Buffett's worst deal benefits this place the most. Few business leaders obsess over failure more than Warren Buffett, though the former Berkshire Hathaway CEO's record makes him a shoo-in for the Investor Hall of Fame. Buffett often prefers talking about his misses more than his hits. One flub in particular seems to gall him, that being his 1993 purchase of Dexter Shoe. Worst deal that I've made, he described it, noting that as a financial disaster, this one deserves a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records. What happened was that after Berkshire bought Dexter in 1993, cheap imported shoes flooded into the U.S., decimating Dexter's operations. But even worse, much worse, is that Buffett paid for the $433 million acquisition with Berkshire stock, 25,203 shares of Berkshire Ace shares to be precise. By using Berkshire stock, I compounded this error hugely, Buffett wrote in 2007. That move made the cost to Berkshire shareholders not $400 million, but rather $3.5 billion. In essence, I gave away 1.6% of a wonderful business, one now valued at $220 billion, to buy a worthless business. That was almost 20 years ago. Today, 25,203 shares of Berkshire would be worth some $19.3 billion. What happened to all that money? If you happen to be in Maine this summer, you might see where some of it has ended up. Maine General Health Hospital near the state capital of Augusta, a revitalized city of Waterville, Alamy, home of Colby College, and an eye-popping new campus under construction for the Rue Institute of Northeastern University, on the site of the old B&M Baked Beans factory on the Portland waterfront. All endeavors were funded from the coffers of the man who sold Dexter to Buffett, Harold Alfond, who died in 2007 and whose charitable work is now carried on by his descendants. The flip side of Warren Buffett's worst deal has become one of the best things that's ever happened to the Pine Tree State. I don't think you can overstate it, says Barry Mills, former president of Bowdoin College and board member of the Harold Alfond Foundation. If you look at economic development, community development, healthcare, and the arts, the Alfonds are the driving philanthropic force of the state, setting ambitions and aspirations for the state with their own. There's just not that much money in Maine, and to have the Alfonds supporting these institutions is incredible. The focus of the foundation is simply to spur the economy and boost education and healthcare in the state of Maine, mostly in concentrated giving, whenever possible by working with partners who have skin in the game, no politics whatsoever. There are other stories of Berkshire billionaires and their good works, but it's hard to think of another instance where an entire state has benefited, as from the Alfonds. A cherubic-looking man with an accent that betrayed his upbringing in Swampscott, Mass. And his subsequent life in Maine, Harold Alfond was the son of Russian immigrants who went to work after high school in a Maine shoe mill with his father. The pair later bought a shoe factory, turned it around, and sold it for a tidy profit. In 1958, the younger Alfond found Dexter Shoe in Dexter, Maine, located on the east branch of the Sebasticook River, 30-odd miles northwest of Bangor. Dexter thrived, and Alfond is said to have created the first factory outlet store, selling his shoes in scores of log cabin-style retail outlets. Invariably, suitors came calling, and ultimately Alfond went with Berkshire. Some 8 years later, with the business tanking, Buffett folded Dexter into his H. Brown Shoe Company. It still sells shoes under the brand name. Berkshire stock has been distributed throughout the Alfond family, which now numbers nearly 4 dozen. A nephew of Alfond's, Peter Lunder, and his family also owned some Berkshire, as Lunder was president and board co-chair of Dexter and was the company's point person with Buffett. Lunder, who's 92, and his wife Paula, who have their own foundation, which distributed $21 million last year, are avid art collectors and benefactors of the Colby Art Museum. The Alfond and Lunder family's holdings reside in various family office accounts, trusts, and foundations, of which the Harold Alfond Foundation is the largest. Its board includes two of Harold's sons, Theodore and William, four grandchildren, and Peter Lunder. Charitable distributions from the foundation come from either gifts of Berkshire stock, mostly A shares, but some converted to B, given directly to nonprofits, that option being the most tax efficient, or sometimes through the sale of Berkshire shares, which, if large enough, have been bought back directly by Berkshire. Buffett's written to me saying, "If you want to sell a bunch of stock, let me know," says Greg Powell, who's 71, a Portland lawyer and board chair of the foundation. Last year, the foundation gave away $104.5 million, with some 99% of grant dollars awarded to Maine institutions or projects. The foundation has assets of $1.69 billion, with nearly $570 million in binding grant commitments payable to charitable institutions in future years. Overall, the foundation has given away some $1 billion in the state. How many shares of Berkshire do the Alfonds and Lunders still own? It's unclear, but one clue comes from the foundation's 2025 report, which notes that the foundation's portfolio has a 17% allocation to Berkshire Hathaway. Powell says it's actually a bit higher than that. So, let's say 20% of $1.7 billion, which is $340 million. Divide that by $768,000, the recent price of Berkshire A stock, and you get some 442 shares. The foundation focuses on youth and community development, education, and healthcare, the last of which includes Maine General, that hospital near Augusta, which garnered some singular funding of the Berkshire variety 15 years ago. The Alfond Foundation put up $55.25 million. And the hospital sold $276 million of tax-exempt bonds, but the project still needed a debt service reserve fund to protect bondholders. The bankers all wanted us to put up $20+ million in cash, recalls Powell. We thought, what if we got a surety bond for the bondholders from an unquestionably creditworthy source like Berkshire Hathaway? The foundation asked the Berkshire Hathaway Assurance Corp. To provide the bond, which Berkshire agreed to do if the foundation would put assets in an account for collateral. And guess which assets were used? Some $23 million of Berkshire stock. As for higher education, the Alfonds have supported schools, colleges, and programs across the state, including a unique endeavor created by private equity investor Dave Rue, who wanted to build a graduate science program to jumpstart the technology side of Maine's economy. When I started, I talked to a dozen folks around the state. All of them pretty much thought I was crazy. But Greg, to his credit, said, "Gee, that's really provocative." Rue partnered with Northeastern University, a leader in flexible learning, and with his wife Barb, has put in over $100 million to start up the Rue Institute. That's R-O-U-X. When Rue presented his fully formed plan to the Alfond board, there was a lot of enthusiasm, Rue recalls. Shortly thereafter, the Alfonds committed more than $100 million as well. They've been a great partner, Rue says about the Alfonds. Good advice, very thoughtful. They're conservative investors, but they're bold in their thinking about putting the money to work philanthropically. In a more traditional vein, the Alfond Foundation has donated $320 million to the University of Maine system, expanding and improving areas like engineering and computer programs, and modernizing UMaine athletic facilities. For context, the annual budget for the University of Maine system is some $718 million. A sports nut, Harold Alfond and the foundation have paid for rinks, gyms, and facilities across the state. Alfond's two sons, Ted and Bill, are minority owners of the Boston Red Sox. The Alfond Foundation has also given some $100 million to Maine's 7 community colleges through the Harold Alfond Center for the Advancement of Maine's Workforce, which provides short-term job training programs and credentials, now with an artificial intelligence focus in partnership with over 2,000 Maine employers. Community colleges came to the foundation a few years ago and had this idea of helping employees of welding companies, electricians, plumbers, engineers get trained up to the next level, says Mills. It's thousands of people, and it's been fabulously successful. And then there's the Harold Alfond College Challenge, which gives a $500 scholarship grant to every child born in Maine. An idea that sounds very much like those Trump accounts, except that Alfond and Powell pioneered the concept back in 2008. Last year, the foundation made college challenge grants totaling $5,844,500 to 11,689 newborns. Through the end of 2025, the foundation has given $87 million to 175,952 Maine children, which, with investment, returns now totals $177 million. Families, state matches, and other contributions, plus returns, have grown this pot of money to over $805 million. The story of the kids from Maine should be told, Buffett wrote to Powell in 2023. They've received not only a significant sum, but also have learned about compound interest and savings. I made a bad deal for Berkshire, but a lot of good came out of it as well. Buffett and the Alfond family declined to comment for this column. For the first time this fall, 18 years since their inception, students will tap into these funds. With so much attention being paid to how Warren Buffett will be distributing his shares of Berkshire Hathaway, no longer to the Gates Foundation, but to 4 family foundations, where the proceeds of the Buffett fortune have gone and will go is perhaps overlooked. The Gates Foundation, with its 2,215 employees, 12 global offices, and work in 143 countries, is one model. The Alfonds chose to leverage their Berkshire holdings by acting locally instead. It'll be interesting to see which tack Buffett's 3 children take as they inherit tens of billions of dollars in Berkshire stock. At a time when populist politicians are pillorying wealthy people, the Alfonds stand out as a family that's put great effort into making its corner of the world a better place, and maybe even giving new meaning to Maine's motto, Dirigo, I lead. With a look back at what happened this week and what's to come next week, we have the review and preview section in Barron's of August 3rd. The story: El Niño may curb trade. 2 of the world's most important shipping lanes have been gummed up by the Iran war, and a third is now having its own problems because of weather. The slowdown could drive up prices for everything from oil to home goods. The Panama Canal is poised to reduce its capacity because of the onset of El Niño, a weather pattern that can cause severe droughts and other extreme weather events in various parts of the world. The Canal Authority has warned clients that the chances of a severe El Niño system has risen to 81% from 25%. For now, the Canal Authority is taking the first steps toward cutting capacity somewhat from the normal 36 vessels a day. But more severe restrictions could be in store given the history of how El Niño affects the Panama Canal. In 2023 and 2024, the last time there was an El Niño pattern, transports were sometimes cut in half to 18 a day, and this El Niño could be even more extreme than the last one. A drop in shipments could have a significant impact on U.S. goods trade, about 12% of which use the canal, based on trade volume according to the United Nations. The canal restrictions come at a time when global shipping is already under stress. Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandab Strait in the Middle East have been severely curtailed. The upshot? A new round of inflation could come sailing into view. And that was written by Avi Salzman. Last week in markets, chip stocks were hammered to start the week, but Tuesday was stellar, with a majority of S&P 500 index stocks up. Stocks tumbled on Wednesday after the Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged and bond yields moved higher. Economic growth slowed in the second quarter, while household spending increased at its strongest pace since the third quarter of last year. Blowout earnings from Microsoft helped energize the tech sector. On the week, the Dow Industrials rose 1%. The S&P 500 gained 1.1%, and the Nasdaq was up 1.6%. In companies last week, Cracker Barrel CEO Julie Masino is stepping down after her initiatives to modernize the restaurant chain backfired. David Dino, former CEO of casual dining company Bloomin' Brands, replaces her. Jersey Mike's Subs IPO started trading at $23, giving it a valuation of $7.3 billion. UBS Group said it plans to buy back $3 billion of its own stock by mid-2027. Microsoft's earnings boosted its stock to the largest single-day percentage increase since 2008. Chevron's earnings per share more than tripled in the second quarter as it pumped more oil and benefited from rising oil prices. In deals last week, NVIDIA is in talks to provide $250 billion for an OpenAI data center in Ohio. Brookfield Asset Management and power company NextEra Energy are teaming up to build a $100 billion AI data center in Kentucky. AI-focused hedge fund Situational Awareness sold the bulk of its stock portfolio to Ken Griffin's Citadel, according to the Wall Street Journal. And this week, on Monday, August 3rd, roughly 60% of S&P 500 index companies have reported results so far, with nearly 90% beating earnings per share estimates and about three-quarters surpassing revenue expectations. This week, Palantir Technologies announces earnings on Monday, followed by Advanced Micro Devices, Booking Holdings, Caterpillar, McDonald's, Merck, and SpaceX on Tuesday. CVS Health, Eli Lilly, SanDisk, Uber Technologies, Walt Disney, and Western Digital report quarterly results on Wednesday, while Airbnb, Constellation Energy, and ConocoPhillips do the same on Thursday. The Institute for Supply Management releases both its manufacturing and services purchasing managers' indexes for July. Consensus estimate for the manufacturing PMI, released on Monday, is a 53.9 reading, while the services PMI, released on Wednesday, is expected to be 54.5. This compares with readings of 53.3 and 54, respectively, in June. And on Friday, August 7th, the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases the jobs report for July. Economists forecast an 83,000 increase in non-farm payrolls after a 57,000 gain in June. The unemployment rate is expected to remain unchanged at 4.2%, and Fed Chairman Kevin Warsh described the labor market as solid and steady this past week. By the numbers, $450 billion. That's Microsoft's gain in market value on July 30th, the largest ever one-day increase for a U.S. company. $270 billion, the supply of new bonds from AI companies this year through early July, almost double the total for all of 2025. $500 billion, the estimated cash haul for oil and gas producers in 2026, more than double earlier projections for the year. 6.6%, the average rate for 30-year fixed-rate mortgages, the highest in a year. Yet another hurdle for the housing market. Moving on to the next column, which is the Tech Trader column. 5 lessons from an exhausting week in tech, and 2 winners by Adam Levine. Are you tired? I'm tired. In addition to 4 big tech companies reporting earnings this past week, the calendar included results for second quarter gross domestic product and June personal consumption expenditures, along with the Federal Reserve's interest rate decision. Unscheduled, there was a meltdown of the artificial intelligence trade as highly leveraged bull positions were liquidated. The iShares Semiconductor Exchange-Traded Fund was down 12% across 3 days, and one of the most successful AI investors, hedge fund Situational Awareness, saw margin calls and forced sales. But on Wednesday afternoon, the skies cleared because demand for AI services is still outstripping supply, even after hundreds of billions of dollars in AI data center expansion. Here are my 5 takeaways from the wild week. The CapEx is paying off. The largest public clouds, Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure, are on fire. Their results added to the success of Google Cloud, reported with Alphabet's results a week earlier. All three cloud segments handily beat expectations for revenue, and even more crucially, operating margin. As the depreciation expenses from previous capital expenditure pile up, the companies have found operational efficiencies to offset those costs. The clear message this earnings season is that there is real profit to be had from all of that CapEx. These companies may be marring their balance sheets and cash flow statements, but their income statements are now seeing a very clear benefit. Despite all of the new data centers already built, cloud capacity remains very tight at all three firms. Amazon.com was even able to raise prices on AI server rentals twice this year, most recently a month ago. The CapEx will continue, at least through the end of this year. Google and Amazon raised their 2026 CapEx guidance, while Microsoft held steady. Together, they'll spend about $600 billion this year on AI data centers, and they're hinting at even more next year. Software gets a boost. As nice as Microsoft's cloud quarter was, its best results may have come in business software. Like other enterprise software companies, Microsoft has been under the microscope amid fears that AI will break its sales growth and profitable subscription pricing model. But in the latest quarter, Microsoft's business software segment beat expectations for both sales and operating margin, defying the bear narrative. Another encouraging sign is that the company's flagship AI software product, Microsoft 365 Copilot, is finally starting to gain traction after a slow start. That's a common pattern for Microsoft products. The company first revealed paid user data 6 months ago, an unimpressive 15 million out of 450 million Microsoft 365 subscriptions. The latest number is still small, but it has doubled to 30 million. Salesforce is seeing something similar with its Agentforce AI software, whose annual recurring revenue has gone from $440 million to over $1 billion in 9 months. Software isn't dead yet. Meta needs a cloud. Alone among the big AI spenders, Meta Platforms still doesn't have a cloud unit to directly monetize all of the AI data centers it's building. In its earnings call, the company projected 2026 CapEx of up to $145 billion, all for a variety of internal purposes. Meta sales were up 28% from last year, and some of that performance is due to AI, but mounting depreciation and AI research expenses sent its profit margin plummeting. The company says that a cloud segment is probably in its future, but for now, it needs all of the computing capacity internally. Apple's AI trade-off. For now, the Apple story is largely unchanged by AI. The stock fell 8% on earnings because Apple continues to trade on its iPhone and services segments, and the latest updates disappointed on both fronts. But the company has plenty of time to get its AI strategy right. The first step will be the release of the new Siri later this year. Apple hasn't engaged in a mad dash to build AI infrastructure. Though research and development expenses are up over 30% this fiscal year, it spent just $2.5 billion on capital expenditure last quarter. Its balance sheet and cash flow statement remain pristine, an increasing rarity in big tech. Situational awareness. It's never good news when a tech hedge fund is forced to liquidate its holdings, but the situational awareness meltdown holds lessons, especially for younger investors who haven't lived through a real bear market. The main message is that trading with borrowed money works the same way on the way down as it does on the way up. You can be right on the fundamentals and still get crushed. Situational awareness was founded in 2024 by a young former OpenAI engineer with a now familiar thesis: buy AI hardware stocks and short software. He was absolutely correct, and the fund's returns, magnified by margin leverage, were stunning. But then came July, and a rapid sell-off for chips. The semiconductor ETF was down 27% from June 30th to July 29th, while the iShares Expanded Tech Software Sector ETF rose by 2%. Margin calls ensued, and Situational Awareness was forced to sell its public company shares to Ken Griffin's Citadel in a block sale. There was liquidity for these assets in the end, and that's a good sign. Situational Awareness just flew too close to the sun. The semiconductor ETF rose 8.5% after the sale on Thursday. The first article in Barron's magazine of August 3rd, Reddit is due for a big AI bump. Forget earnings. Reddit has become the voice of the internet. Why the future of AI could depend on the company's success, by Angela Palumbo and Nate Wolf. Since Reddit went public in 2024, the social media site has had a marriage of convenience with Google. Well, it's time to renew the vows. Google has paid a reported $60 million a year to train its artificial intelligence models using conversations from Reddit's more than 100,000 communities. The pair are now locked in contract renewal talks that could make or break Reddit's stock. The talks also could go a long way in determining the value of human content in the age of AI. Investors are clearly skittish about it all. Reddit stock fell 8.3% in one day last week when the Wall Street Journal reported that the company had considered walking away from the negotiating table. Reddit has plenty of leverage to get a better deal even without walking away. As AI models advance, they require ever more human content to improve. On the flip side, those same AI models threaten to cannibalize the search traffic that drives viewers to Reddit's site and feeds its advertising engine, which generated $2.6 billion in revenue over the past 4 quarters. Reddit stock fell more than 21% on Friday after the company's latest quarterly earnings crushed estimates but showed a slight decline in U.S. daily users from the previous quarter. Shares are down some 40% this year. That dynamic makes the negotiation with Alphabet-owned Google a crucial test for the company. For now, Wall Street's taking a wait-and-see approach. While quarterly numbers are clearly moving the stock, the big picture is around AI. If Reddit secures a better deal with Google in the coming months, the stock could soar. And there's good reason to think both companies need each other. Reddit has long been one of the most searched terms on Google as people look to the site for human-generated answers to everyday questions. A few real examples. What's the best car for a new driver? Or am I the a-hole for thinking it's absurd my husband made only half the bed? Reddit shares have soared 314% since the stock went public in March of 2024 at $34 a share. But it's been a bumpier ride of late. The stock's down 48% from its all-time closing high of $270.71 last September. The site's own usefulness became a double-edged sword after Google, the internet's search giant, launched AI Overviews on May 14, 2024, right after Reddit's initial public offering. The AI-powered overviews are automated responses to queries that appear at the top of Google's search page. While answers include source links, data show that the overviews have decreased the need for people to visit independent websites. Barron's reported a year ago on the major shift that the launch of Google's overviews was already having on the internet economy. The trend has accelerated since then. The main impact on Reddit appears to be a slowdown in its user growth. While daily active users around the world increased 17% from the prior year in the first quarter, 18% in the second quarter, those figures are down from 31% and 21% growth respectively a year earlier. Though Reddit remains the 6th most visited site in the world, per SEMrush, investors worry what slowing user growth means for the future of advertising, which accounted for 94% of Reddit's revenue last year. A Reddit spokesperson acknowledged that all publishers will be subjected to changing search trends, but said that improved product features would spur continued growth and engagement. Meanwhile, the company points out advertising has grown at a faster clip than users. After Reddit's first quarter earnings report in April, CEO Steve Huffman called his site's content the oil for the modern internet. The remark wasn't just a catchy slogan, but also a potential signal to the world's largest AI companies. Our price is going up. Wall Street estimates that Google pays Reddit about $60 million a year to scrape content from the site. It uses the data in turn to power the AI products that have seemingly siphoned search traffic away from Reddit. OpenAI, which didn't respond to requests for comment, is thought to pay a similar or slightly higher amount. The draw for AI labs is simple. Reddit is an ever-expanding repository of human knowledge, opinion, and interaction. It's built-in quality control since users can upvote or downvote posts and comments. Ask ChatGPT for a trip itinerary or a product recommendation, and the chatbot may well cite an anonymous Redditor. The information could be wrong, but at least it's human-approved. While the rest of the internet overflows with AI-generated content, that $60 million annual fee now looks like a friendly deal for Google, says New Street research analyst Dan Salmon. We very much think that there's still lots of value in real human interaction and real human information that Reddit has, Salmon tells Barron's. The content licensing agreements constituted about 6% of Reddit's total revenue in 2025, but that number could jump sharply next year as the deals come up for renewal. The companies have had ongoing talks throughout the partnership, a Reddit spokesperson said. Several institutional investors and sell-side analysts say they expect Reddit to secure a larger deal. A best-case scenario would include Reddit getting a usage-based agreement that goes beyond a flat fee. Wells Fargo analyst Alec Brondolo forecasts in June that Reddit's renewed agreements with OpenAI and Google could come at a combined $550 million a year, more than quadruple current levels. Both Reddit and Google declined to comment on what they called private negotiations, but Google has been clear about its focus on AI above all else, both through executive commentary and its soaring budget for capital expenditure. Our AI investments are redefining what's possible across every part of our business, says Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet, on the company's earnings call last week. On the other side of the negotiating table, Reddit has proved a willingness to protect the value of its data. The company sued AI startup Anthropic in June 2025 for allegedly scraping Reddit's data to train its large language model, Claude. This case is about the two faces of Anthropic, the public face that attempts to ingratiate itself into the consumer's consciousness with claims of righteousness and respect for boundaries and the law, and then the private face that ignores any rules that interfere with its attempts to further line its pockets, Reddit said in the lawsuit. Anthropic declined to respond to a request for comment. An Anthropic spokesperson told Barron's in June 2025 that we disagree with Reddit's claims and will defend ourselves vigorously. Anthropic has already settled other data training cases tied to copyright infringement. On July 20th, a federal judge approved a $1.5 billion deal in which Anthropic will pay thousands of authors about $3,000 each. But Reddit's ongoing suit against Anthropic could be more significant because its argument centers around user agreement violations, not copyright laws. Kirk Sigmund, founding partner of Keldan Law, says it's an important distinction that could limit Anthropic's ability to claim fair use of Reddit data. Sigmund believes that the case will be settled before Anthropic's highly anticipated IPO. Clearing up the Anthropic case and expanding the AI licensing contracts would go a long way toward boosting Reddit's stock. Analysts tracked by FactSet expect the company to record $177 million in non-advertising revenue in 2027, just 4% of total business. But that's largely a shot in the dark, given the closed-door nature of the negotiations. Half Moon Capital, a small New York hedge fund with a stake in Reddit, recently had a $295 price target on Reddit shares, more than double current levels, even without new AI licensing deals. Reddit's U.S. revenue per user jumped more than 50% in 2025 as its ad technology improved, wrote Half Moon in an internal research note. And advertisers have caught on to the same thing that AI labs have. People use Reddit for product recommendations, making the platform fertile ground for brands. Others have made the licensing business a part of their thesis. Scott Grieder, managing partner at Broad Bay Capital Management, which owns Reddit stock, expects the contracts to get renewed this year at a higher number, giving shares a needed boost. Success in the negotiations and in the courtroom could help Reddit stock in two ways: sentiment and earnings. Reddit shares trade at 23 times projected earnings over the next year. That's down from an 80 times multiple last year. New AI deals could restore some of that premium. Perhaps more importantly, a big licensing deal would unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in new profit. Advertising will remain Reddit's bread and butter, but content licensing comes with wide margins and low costs as the business scales up. Scarce assets tend to become more valuable over time, a Reddit spokesperson told Barron's, and authentic human conversation at scale is becoming increasingly rare. We'll move to the cover story now in Barron's of August 3rd, The Everything Drug. The next wave of GLP-1s is coming. They'll treat a lot more than obesity. This blockbuster class of drugs is shattering all sales records. Which stock will do better, Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk? This is written by Jack Huff. There's little debate over which Wall Street profit story is the biggest of the moment: artificial intelligence. For second biggest, consider the case for GLP-1 drugs. Industry leader Eli Lilly, which reports second quarter results this coming Wednesday, recently passed Walmart, Verizon, and the rest of Big Pharma in profit power. This year, it's expected to earn $31 billion. That's up 36% and good for 14th place in the S&P 500 index. By 2030, that figure could double, which would put Lilly ahead of Bank of America and ExxonMobil Holdings and within sight of JP Morgan Chase. All of the rest of the big earners are AI giants. Medicine and computer chips aren't much alike, but in this case, there are key parallels. These are capacity-constrained markets with immense pricing power and vast and growing demand. With AI, the better it gets, the more uses customers find for it. GLP-1s are about to get a lot better too. Imagine burning more fat while resting and preserving more muscle. There's also rising insurance coverage, new delivery methods, and an explosion of potential uses. Today, GLP-1s are primarily thought of as obesity shots. Tomorrow, they may look more like an everything pill. Since GLP-1s control appetite, they work wonders for weight loss, so it's unsurprising that they've proved useful for other conditions related to weight and diet: sleep apnea, fatty liver, and heart disease. But did you know that they're also being studied for drug and alcohol addiction, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, knee arthritis, psoriasis, asthma, ovarian cysts, and cancer risk reduction? The great thing with this medicine, or this class of medicines, is it does target multiple different pathways that seem to have broad-ranging positive benefits across our bodies, says Terrence Flynn, head of U.S. pharma and biotech coverage at Morgan Stanley. For now, the GLP-1 market is a duopoly. Denmark's Novo Nordisk was the early leader with semaglutide, sold as Ozempic for diabetes and Wegovy for obesity. Indiana-based Eli Lilly has taken the lead with its more effective tirzepatide, branded as Mounjaro for diabetes and Zepbound for obesity. Sales estimates have multiplied. In 2022, when Barron's wrote about Lilly's entrance into the market, JP Morgan predicted that GLP-1 sales would reach $34 billion by 2031, a figure that now looks quaint. This year, Morgan Stanley raised its 2035 GLP-1 sales prediction from $150 billion to $190 billion from diabetes and obesity alone. That would mean 30% penetration by then among obese Americans, up from 6% last year, and about 10% penetration outside the U.S. Nothing in history comes close. Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine peaked near $40 billion in 2022, and a class of cancer drugs led by Merck's Keytruda does about $50 billion a year. There's surging growth, and two new factors are adding to growth. For more than 2 decades, federal law has forbidden Medicare, the federal health plan for seniors, from paying for drugs intended solely for weight loss. And that changed on July 1st with a temporary program with $50 copays for a month's supply, to be replaced by a permanent program after 2027. More than 2/3 of Medicare beneficiaries are overweight or obese. The rule change will raise costs in the short run, but advocates say it will pay for itself over time by reducing costly health complications. Beyond Medicare, workplace coverage for obesity meds is on the rise too, from 44% of employers in 2024 to an estimated 60% this year and 65% next year. In one consumer survey, patients with and without coverage reported paying an average out-of-pocket cost of $119 a month, down from $172 last year and $196 in 2024. Pills are another plus for growth. Branded GLP-1s have come in auto-injector pens or single-dose vials, but in January, Novo launched a Wegovy pill, and Lilly followed in April with a pill called Foundayo. This promises to expand sales to the needle-averse and the cost-sensitive, as well as to overseas markets where refrigerating injectables isn't feasible. With pills, the competition is close. Lilly's edge in injectables comes from the fact that tirzepatide is what's called a dual agonist drug, targeting receptors for 2 hormones, glucagon-like peptide 1, or GLP-1, and glucose-dependent insulin-tropic polypeptide, or GIP. Novo's semaglutide targets only GLP-1. Think of these receptors as locks and natural hormones as keys, with obesity drugs serving as duplicate keys that fit the same locks to, say, tell the brain to stop craving food. With pills, Lilly's effectiveness advantage is erased, because both its pill and Novo's work on a single receptor. In fact, the Novo pill has achieved slightly more weight loss in trials. But Lilly's pill wins on flexibility. It's a small synthesized molecule with high stability, which gives it a long shelf life and means it can be taken at any time of day with or without food. The Novo pill, on the other hand, is a peptide, or a chain of amino acids, which makes it finickier about storage and means it must be taken immediately upon waking with no more than several ounces of water, followed by a 30-minute wait before drinking coffee or eating. The differences could be important for sales overseas, where shelf life matters. While Lilly controls about 60% of the injectables market, Novo has an early 85% share in pills, although sales there are only beginning to ramp up. Pills are expected to make up 1/4 of the market by 2030, and so far, they don't seem to excessively cannibalize sales of injectables. More than 3/4 of Wegovy pill users say they're new to GLP-1s, not switching from injectables. And here come generics. Patent cliffs appear unlikely to spoil the profit party, especially for Lilly. It has until 2036 before key patents expire in the U.S., compared with 2031 for Novo. Both companies have amassed a thicket of patents on specific formulations and injector designs that run past 2040. One investor concern is that a generic form of Novo's semaglutide, Ozempic and Wegovy, 5 years from now could be cheap enough to lure patients off Lilly's tirzepatide, Mounjaro and Zepbound. But this might underestimate the massive manufacturing investments that Lilly and Novo have made. Investment bank UBS analyzed production trends in markets like India, where semaglutide lost its primary patent protection early this year. One generic supplier there, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, recently lowered its guidance on auto-injector pen delivery from 12 million a year to 6 to 7 million a year due to impurities and other setbacks. UBS reckons that the world's generic ecosystem will only be able to support 25 to 30% of GLP-1 demand by 2030. Even after generics launch in the U.S., many patients will be willing to pay premium prices for the best performance. Lilly's performance lead is about to grow. Retatrutide, a drug the company is testing, is nicknamed Triple G or 3G because it works on the same GLP-1 and GIP receptors as tirzepatide, plus a third receptor for the hormone glucagon. In a key trial, patients on the maximum dose of retatrutide, RETATRUTIDE, lost an average of 28% of their body weight, or 70 pounds after 80 weeks. And that compares with separate trials showing 21% body weight loss after 72 weeks for Zepbound and 15% after 68 weeks for Wegovy. Basically, Novo's Wegovy suppresses appetite and slows stomach emptying, and Lilly's Zepbound adds to those effects improved fat breakdown for greater weight loss. Retatrutide is believed to add an increased baseline energy expenditure so that patients burn more calories while resting. The weight loss achieved rivals that of bariatric surgery. What's more, retatrutide might be effective for a higher percentage of patients than other drugs, and because it's so powerful, it can be taken at low doses by patients who are sensitive to side effects. If approved by the Food and Drug Administration, retatrutide could launch in the U.S. as soon as late next year. Side effects of GLP-1 drugs can include nausea and fatigue. Some patients consume too little protein and skip exercise, leading to muscle loss along with fat loss. But help might be on the way. Lilly is studying a drug called eloralintide, which mimics a hormone called amylin that's produced in the pancreas, whereas hormones targeted by the existing drugs are produced in the gut. Eloralintide appears to be able to signal fullness to the brain without the same stomach slowing of GLP-1s, and to tell the body to burn fat while sparing muscle. Compared with retatrutide, eloralintide is at an earlier stage of development. Results in a phase 2 trial showed weight loss at 48 weeks that exceeded that of Wegovy and approached that of Zepbound, with a higher ratio of fat loss to muscle loss. Because eloralintide works on a different neural pathway than GLP-1 drugs, Lilly is studying it with tirzepatide. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Because eloralintide works on a different neural pathway than GLP-1 drugs, Lilly is studying it with tirzepatide to see if a lower dose combo drug can produce strong fat loss with limited side effects. If it's successful, the soonest that drug would come to market is probably 2028 or 2029. Novo, meanwhile, has completed phase 3 trials on its own amylin combo drug called CagriSema, which appears to achieve weight loss similar to that of Zepbound. Novo's new drug could be first to market, perhaps within a year, but Lilly's coming drugs work on more pathways, so Lilly appears likely to win again on performance. Sizing up the stocks. Stock investors eyeing the GLP-1 market leaders face a stark choice. Lilly shares have multiplied 5 times in price over the past 5 years. Novo's American depository receipts have lagged well behind the S&P 500 index over that same stretch, gaining just 11%. That leaves Novo at 15.6 times this year's earnings forecast, compared with 34.8 times for Lilly. Wall Street overwhelmingly prefers Lilly, which is projected to double its earnings per share over 5 years starting from this year, versus cumulative 29% growth seen for Novo over that period. The Novo ADR comes with a bigger dividend yield, 3.5% versus a fraction of 1% for Lilly. Both companies stand to benefit from a regulatory crackdown on sales of knockoff drugs by so-called compounding pharmacies. Novo turned a lawsuit against online seller Hims & Hers Health into a sales agreement between the two that was signed earlier this year. By 2031, Lilly is expected to gush more than $62 billion in free cash versus $22 billion for Novo. Ramping free cash is already funding research and tuck-in deals to diversify beyond GLP-1s. In mid-July, for example, Lilly announced it will acquire a depression drug developer called Atai-Beckley for $2.8 billion in cash, plus a potential $1 billion in performance payments. Morgan Stanley's Flynn has an overweight rating on Lilly. A colleague of his is equal weight on Novo, and is also bullish on a small and so far profitless company called Structure Therapeutics. Structure has an oral GLP-1 drug in late-stage trials and an oral amylin drug in early-stage trials. Viking Therapeutics, another small loss-making drug developer, is pursuing a rival to Zepbound in both injectable and pill form, and has an early-stage amylin drug. Among big pharma companies horning in, Amgen is working on a monthly injectable, as opposed to weekly for ones already on the market. So is Pfizer, after scrapping a pill that showed high liver toxicity in early trials. Societal slimdown. GLP-1 drugs faced an early social stigma for representing an easy way out, or being a vanity pursuit. That hasn't slowed uptake. As a top stock strategist recently confided to Barron's, "I go to pool parties now, and I'm the only fat one." As researchers learn more about how and why these drugs work, the stigma could continue to fade. GLP-1 receptors are located throughout the body, including the brain, lungs, and immune cells. One reason these drugs are being studied for such a variety of ailments is that they appear to act as inflammation modulators, not just simple appetite suppressants. Chronic inflammation is seen as a root cause of many diseases. There is robust clinical evidence that GLP-1s can reduce deaths from heart disease, the #1 killer globally, not just as a side benefit of weight loss, but through a more direct effect on arterial plaque formation and inflammatory fat around the heart. In asthma, studies of GLP-1 patients have shown fewer attacks and less inhaler dependency. Research has failed to show that GLP-1s can treat active Alzheimer cases, but there is a pattern of GLP-1s reducing lifetime risk of an Alzheimer's diagnosis. There's also some evidence that GLP-1s can prevent or slow progression in many cancers by, for example, reducing DNA damage and cell mutation caused by inflammation, and starving tumor cells of high levels of insulin and glucose. Already, GLP-1 effects might be showing up at the societal level. The U.S. obesity rate has climbed for decades, but as the country celebrated its 250th birthday this year, one survey put the rate at 40.7%, down from 42.3% 5 years ago. There is much further to go. In 1976, when America turned 200, the obesity rate was a mere 15%. Some analysts predict modest declines in aggregate calorie consumption in coming years. That might also be already contributing to a slump in big food shares. Makers of medical devices have sold off too, partly on fears that GLP-1s can ward off the need for many future surgeries. Long term, if GLP-1s contribute to broader metabolic health improvement, any dent to sales of, say, unhealthy foods or bariatric and heart procedures will be eclipsed by economic gains elsewhere, says Lars Hartenstein, Director of Healthy Longevity at the McKinsey Health Institute. By his math, achieving better health at scale could boost the global economy by more than $5 trillion a year, or about 3% by 2050. If people are healthier, they can be more productive, participating more in the workforce, and there will also be less premature deaths, he says. All of it points to many more years of growth for the likes of Lilly, Novo, and their challengers. And we'll close with the economy portion of Barron's of August 3rd. The Fed makes its case for productivity growth by Megan Lenhart. Productivity has been heralded in recent years as the U.S. has seen an uptick in labor efficiency gains. The Federal Reserve has now joined the productivity chorus, embracing the metric as one determinant in setting the path for monetary policy. But Fed officials may be expressing too much optimism too soon. Robust productivity growth is often seen as a silver bullet in economies because it helps lift living standards and economic output without adding inflationary pressures. In an era of slowing U.S. population growth, productivity growth is increasingly necessary to maintain the nation's future economic success. The Fed heralded strong productivity growth in the statement it released Wednesday after July's Federal Open Market Committee meeting. Under Chairman Kevin Warsh, the Fed characterized it as strong in both its June and July statements. Warsh has prioritized data collection and analysis regarding productivity since taking the reins of the Fed in May. One of the 5 task forces he's formed is focused on productivity and jobs, with the goal of assessing the economic impact of new technologies, including AI. He reiterated on Wednesday that he believes productivity to be one of the big questions policymakers will need to address. What's really happening with productivity, he asked. The problem with this focus on strong productivity is that while the gains have been good, they've been slowing over the past year. Moreover, the latest data doesn't indicate that the U.S. economy has entered a sustained period of high productivity, at least not yet. This isn't the first time the Fed has cited strong productivity growth in its policy statement, but the last time was more than 20 years ago when Alan Greenspan chaired the central bank. From 2002 to 2005, labor productivity growth averaged 3.3% annually, a rate worth crowing about. The U.S. is hardly experiencing Greenspan-era levels of productivity growth today. Non-farm business sector labor productivity increased by just 0.3% in the first quarter of 2026, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Last year, average annual labor productivity slowed to 2.3% from 2024's average annual pace of 2.9%. Labor productivity rose 2.1% in this year's first quarter on an annualized basis. To be sure, this compares with a 1.5% annual average gain from the end of 2007 through 2019. The Bureau of Labor Statistics will report the change in second quarter productivity August 6th. Economists expect productivity grew by just 0.9% in the quarter. The productivity gains in recent years have been driven by capital expenditure, changing labor market dynamics, and business dynamism, rather than the direct effects of AI. Labor productivity is the measure of how efficiently workers generate goods and services. The BLS calculates it as total gross domestic product growth, or real output divided by the number of hours worked. Total factor productivity growth, another measure of productivity gains that also includes growth in capital, has been even more modest recently. Neither the Fed statement nor Warsh defined which data set the Fed is referring to. Private non-farm business sector total factor productivity measured annually increased 0.8% in 2025. During this year's first quarter, it declined by 0.33% compared with the prior quarter, according to the latest estimate from the San Francisco Fed. AI potentially could lift productivity growth and provide a boost to the economy, although there has been ample debate about its ultimate impact. But it seems premature for the Fed to hail strong productivity growth as a critical driver of economic conditions. And with that, we've come to the end of our reading of Barron's Magazine for August 3rd of 2026. This is your reader, Eric, saying be well, be safe, look after each other. Bye for now.